And I think in the next session that we are entering, we're going to have more people sharing about their views and mostly their work, a session which has been organized by Seunghye. And maybe Seunghye, you want to introduce the session and what you were planning and what we will be seeing in the next hour.
Yeah, hello. So this session will be like a mini colloquium where 7 groups share their work. I guess I can also share the screen, but I mean, we're officially going to start in 2 minutes. So people, you can have break. But yeah, just so that you know, we are going to, we wanted to have a space where people can share their work, but maybe intimidated for the whole 1 hour session, but still, have a space. So I hope you can see this. But we will start in a minute, so take a break. This is the order. But I will skip the intro because as you see, we have 7 people and 10 minutes. That is 70 minutes, which doesn't make it an hour. So we cut, I guess, a minute or 2 here and there. Yeah, so it will be mostly 5-minute presentation from each people and then up to 5-minute discussion right afterwards or in the end, depending on what the presenter prefers. Yeah, so we will start with Max in a minute. I will stop sharing at 5 and he can start his screen share later.
I think it's a bit funny. We jumped over both the breaks I planned in.
Breaks were
I
there
haven't
just
had lunch.
Just to extend the discussion.
But it's perfect also because it kind of shows that people are very, interested and eager to continue the conversation. So I'm not too sad that I haven't gotten a break.
Yeah, Lara, you can now take a break and we're gonna hand it over to Max. Would you like to share screen, Max? Oh, we don't hear you. You are unmuted, but I don't hear you. We see your screen, but we don't hear. Oh, now we hear.
Okay. Does that work?
Yes, full screen.
Perfect. Yeah, so I guess we just jump right in, huh?
Yes, please.
Without a break. Well, yeah, so Astrid mentioned already the FEAST project earlier. And I was one of the members of the FEAST project, which by now, since this year, is the FEAST NPO. So we established ourselves as an NPO after the end of the project time. And within that project that was looking at food transitions in Asia, we started a smaller project called the School Lunch 2050. And the School Lunch 2050 is basically a science-based art installation in the beginning, and then it became more and more and more. And at this point, maybe I would like to ask you you can open the homepage for it. It's school-lunch2050.org. And you will see the starting screen. From there on, you can click through different questions and you'll end up at the scenario, which is also here shown in the middle of the screen, and scenario table. So we created basically 4 scenarios which are looking at climate change. So it's the idea of, are we going to manage the 1.5 degrees climate change, or are we not going to manage the 1.5 degrees climate change? And at the same time, it tried to look at the question of, is the food system of Japan going to be more localized or is it going to be more globalized? And out of these 4 scenarios, then emerge very different futures. And from the futures, from these scenario descriptions, we then created school lunch menus. So each item of the menu represents then a certain research finding, a certain development of the future. And so, because it didn't start as a homepage, first we actually created really the lunches. So out of plastic, these kind of, as commonly found in East Asian restaurants, maybe in windows, you can see meals in the windows, and they're made out of some kind of plastic material. So we really created these future lunch sets and displayed them in installations for, especially for school children, to engage on the question of climate change and food systems. And with the pandemic striking globally, all events were canceled, and we moved basically everything online into the homepage that you can open now. And this one is available in Japanese and in English. And the advantage of the homepage now is also that you will find references to each of the scenarios. So before that was a bit difficult, but now if you click on one of these black colored snippets in one of the black colored, how do you say, yeah, pieces in the scenario drawings, it will uncover text, and in that text box you will find a little icon where you can click on information, and you will find more references for each of the scenarios. So maybe later on you can just click through it as you like, uncover the future and scroll and tap here and there. It works on, should work on all browsers and on all devices. And so for me, one of the questions now was basically, how could we make more versions for other countries? I think that's one of the things I'm interested in. How would the future look differently? But also the references now that we have, and there's basically all this, it's a big database of information about climate change and food trade, but also all these examples of how future food is being developed already. So in niches or in startups and so on and so on. And they are very dispersed in a way. And I'm wondering how could there be a more comprehensive way of trying to bring all these different possible future strands into one larger image? Because if we if you Google for future food, or if you come across something in media, what is being depicted as the future of food is very technocentric, lots of AI, robot, I don't know what kind of stuff. But reality is that the future could equally be, we are all living in permaculture futures, or like it doesn't need to be high-tech, human-less AI farms. But the image about the future, especially for food, is very much driven by these high-tech futures, which goes back to some of what the things said already yesterday, I think, by the Share City, Luis from Share City, and some other presentations today. So if anybody has suggestions or ideas of how to share information and be open for people to add on topics of the future, I would be happy to hear from you in the Slack or today or wherever I'm available. That's all I want to say for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand or type in the chat. And also, Max has the longer presentation on our YouTube channel, right? Yeah,
that's right.
About the school plant project.
Right.
I was just curious how, yeah, this menu, I was just wondering, like, how did you actually come up with very specific menu for each future?
So we did, in a way, we did a kind of horizon scan where we tried to look at all the different ways, all the different technologies and ways that are being researched or already tested. And from there, we came up with the menus then, because Japanese school menus are kind of run in such plans. Like you can get a plan for the whole month with each food item, and it's being calculated by nutritionists. And usually they have these 5 to 7 items. There's usually a tea and the milk and so on. So there was already some cultural background and setting of how a school lunch looks like. And so basically we started from there. And then we switched some of the ingredients. So some school lunches might look familiar, but then if you scroll over the content, you will see, oh, well, actually, this is not just tofu, it's cricket, or it's not chicken, but it's a lab-grown meat or something. So one of the ways how new food is being introduced into markets is basically by using already known shapes or known taste or known ways. So the hurdle of consumers to adapt a new product is lower. So we try to include all different kinds of research fields around food as well. And so there's a certain way how marketing around food works, and we try to also look at that a bit. So either it's outrageous and you go for the rainbow toast, which is so abnormal and absurd that somebody will buy it because it's never been there, or you go for something that looks very similar to what we know, like the sausage shape or something, but it's not sausage anymore in sense of meat. It's now a sausage of soy or a sausage of cricket, or so it's easier for the consumer to take up. And that's already happening. If you look how cricket is being marketed in Europe, where usually people don't eat insects, it's coming through flowers and covered in chocolate, and so it's something people are used to easily eat, and you don't see the cricket anymore. It's different from Asian traditions. And it would be similar in Japan, where, for example, cricket isn't that common anymore.
Thank you. So I shared the link to the webinar on our YouTube channel. Yeah, so you can also check that out and then also leave some questions on our Slack channel. I will leave the link to that as well. And next we have Nicola. Yeah, thank you, Max, very much. And it's Nicola, are you there? You're there, yeah. Yes.
I actually don't have much to share in terms of picture, but I will quickly share my screen as I explain one of the projects I worked with at the very beginning of my PhD. It was a backcasting project called Beyond GDP Growth. That was a project with about how Swedish society could fulfill very ambitious both ecological and social sustainability targets by 2050 without any assumption that there will be economic growth, basically. So radical scenarios for the Swedish society. And I just wanted to share with you this picture that is on one of the inner covers of the final reports, which I think I like a lot. So my work within that project, I actually came in quite late, and I did not contribute to developing to the qualitative descriptions of the scenarios in the first place. But my work with that project was trying to bring a little bit of a new perspective by trying to model in a more quantitative way some aspects of the scenarios. And in particular, most of my work was focusing on the building sector. And it is something that I still, to this day, I still wonder myself. Essentially, I am trying to put my finger on what exactly did I do? What value did it bring? But the work I did was that I built a spreadsheet model to model emissions of the building sector in these various scenarios. And then I modified the parameters in 4 different ways corresponding to these 4 scenarios, so that each each set of parameters fulfills the same greenhouse gas emissions in 2050. And then that was a way of essentially illustrating what buildings would look like if the climate target was fulfilled in each of these scenarios. And so in a way, I think the value of this work has been that it was trying to use numbers, to use quantitative modeling, but to serve the qualitative descriptions by providing an illustration of, in this case, what buildings would be like. So it is, in a way, very different from big top-down models that try to represent very high-level parameters at the societal level. This one was very much bottom-up and very much trying to represent very concrete aspects of the buildings. So like how many square meters per person in houses and offices, and what materials are the buildings made of, things like that. And it allowed us to see, for instance, that if we wanted to reach the climate target or reduce greenhouse gas emissions by the value we needed to, which was over 90%, by the way, so very ambitious targets. Essentially, there was no way of reaching this without deep modifications to what buildings would look like, and in particular, in terms of floor area per person, which highlights an aspect that is not discussed much at all in common like sustainability strategies for the building sector. Very few people are arguing that we should build smaller apartments or things like that. So we are highlighting the fact that it seems nearly it's not feasible to reach the climate targets if we don't address this prickly aspect of how much space we have for ourselves in buildings. And this reduction of floor area per person was achieved differently in the different scenarios. So one thing we studied further after that was the potential to reach this through space sharing and co-living models of housing, instead of like, the detached family house model. And so then it informed the rest of my PhD in a way, since I ended up doing a further study about barriers to the implementation of space sharing in the building sector, for instance. So moving from the anticipation to the governance in a way. So this modeling exercise, this backcasting modeling was a starting point to highlight issues of interest, and then we try to investigate what are the challenges to implement these needed strategies in a way. And I am very interested in this interface between anticipation or imaginaries and practice. How do we move from one to the other? How do these anticipation exercises inform policy making or decision making? And to me, this is, I think earlier in the discussion, there was a discussion point about the fact that imaginaries are to a large extent implicit, or to a large extent not expressed or not visible. And that's something I have difficulties with. If I think I'm reaching the end of my time, so this is departing a bit from my work, but it's a point I kind of wanted to raise. If something is implicit or not visible, how can you study it? Or is it even there? I've been recently in my work, I have been using theories like actor network theory that essentially focus very much on how things are expressed in artifacts and things like that, and interact with actors, and makes the point that if something is not visible, then it's not there, essentially. And I'm trying to reconcile both. Like I feel strongly that there is this notion of imaginaries that is permeating everything. On the other hand, I do struggle with studying them in situations where they are not expressed or visible. To me, I focus very much on how actors concretely interact with these imaginaries. And I think I stopped there. I'm over time already.
Thank you. That's an interesting question. Yeah, anyone else has some questions or to add to or answer to Nicolas' question? Because you are also looking into decision-making in building sector, right? Oh, yeah. Anyone else? Oh, yeah. Vitalija.
Yes, thank you, Nicola. Very interesting work. I was just wondering if you would be interested to explore further a bit like this kind of soft data or warm data. For example, there's a lot of now this meta-modern groups that are using presencing techniques and sensing techniques, this collective sensing and collective imaginaries. Yeah, it's like Otto Schammer, I think there are several institutes and communities around. What do you think? I don't know if you are familiar with that, and if you would be interested to go a little bit. Yeah, I think they themselves try to be a little bit more off of script. Yeah, but we as a scientist, if we could somehow observe it and to see what is really there.
I am not familiar with it, but I am definitely curious. If you could send any link or information, I would definitely be interested. I can just briefly mention that in the latest project I was working on how different artifacts influence decisions taken during construction projects. And one thing I see is that things like certification systems or databases, any like kind of quantification tool, any numbers have very unexpected influences on the actors. And so they are used by people to justify their decisions post hoc, or they are used as reference points for people to agree on very ambiguous concepts, like what does sustainability means? It means adhering to this certification system. So I am becoming more and more interested in what roles do numbers actually play in decision making. But I think that's an entire tangent away from anticipatory governance. But I would say it's not something I have much expertise on yet, this study of the role of numbers themselves, but definitely something I'm interested in. So I very much appreciate if you can send any information on that. Thank you.
Thank you. I will post a link to the Slack if anyone wants to share some information to the presenters or among themselves. And next is actually my presentation, so I will keep it short. Yeah, so I was hoping that Nicolas might introduce something about life cycle assessment in his session, but he didn't. So it is about life cycle assessment. And because when we do like for product or services or like for investments, often we use environmental life cycle assessment. But we wanted to see, because like example for like Nicolas, if you do life cycle assessment for buildings, like the building will be there for 50 years or even longer, then buildings use a lot of electricity or heat. And if you do assessment with the heat mix or electricity mix now, it's not going to be useful, because in 20 years, 30 years, the electricity mix and heat mix should be different. At least that's what many countries aim for. So, but then we don't have data for the future. Of course, there are often national projections or like from IEA, but that's usually just one single projection, or maybe like, business as usual and like a good one. So like two of them. But we were wondering, and also like for electricity, it's quite often available, but if it's for other things, like, do we have enough information for like heat mix or transport fuel for the future? And then because the database that we use for life cycle assessment is using current data, or more often like past data, right, from a year ago, 2 years ago. So yeah, we wanted to see what we can do. And currently there are many works done in life cycle assessment called prospective life cycle assessment to incorporate future data into the database. And often they use the integrated assessment models that are also fed into IPCC reports and generate like thousands of sets of data and then put it into the database. But then, as Nicolas mentioned, like, yeah, what we don't see or don't talk about is also the assumption of models. And many of the IM models are based on cost optimization. Of course, you put the climate target and so on. There are restrictions, but many things is that, yeah, what is the cheapest technology that is possible with this certain climate or restrictions? But we thought that if we want to have different kind of decision-making paradigm, so if we don't put the cost, the cheapest option as the optimization goal, but if we put something like, so we thought, oh yeah, like there are many talks about like donor economy or embedded economy, and so that like economy, that's what we put in the middle at the moment. But then there's also human society, which is sort of bigger than the economy. And then there's also nature and biosphere. But what if we optimize like our decision making based on something other than profit or cost? And like, for example, health and well-being or human rights, or like climate change. Like climate change is a little bit in between human society and nature, or biodiversity. Then how will be the future database should look different? And because we don't have really computational models, it will be a bit more qualitative. And now this is just like idea for now, but we thought that we wanted to call them like guiding stars. Like, so if we would choose these guiding stars, like, for example, if the business as usual is cost, if we would choose human health and see, like, for example, which building materials or which electricity will be, or which fuel, biofuel or like electric car, what will actually be most beneficial for human health or human rights. And for me, I think now the challenge is to choose the indicator, because we can't really cover everything in the society and the nature. But I wanted to choose like, we wanted to choose some guiding stars and indicators that are more operational. So because this paper, like this research will be more like a proof of concept, kind of testing out the idea. So if we choose something other than cost and profit, will the result be different? Will our LCA result be different? Will our future electricity mix and heat mix, how will they differ depending on different guiding stars, different decision-making goals? So that is why I'm now on my way to choose these indicators. And these are some options like child labor. You know, this is more quantifiable and also quite important, I believe, or like inequality. So we looked into some like SDG indicators, or these are social LCA indicators, and some papers on social LCA and so on. Yeah, but it's not fixed yet. So if you have any good ideas on some indicators that we could use for human society or nature, that would be really cool. Or if you have any good ideas on how to incorporate future into life cycle assessment, that will also be cool. So what we want to do is say what kind of mix of carbon services will most likely to react in a world where we optimize something other than cost. Yep, there's more detail, but I guess I stop here. But yeah, maybe I should introduce more about life cycle assessment with the time limitation. Yeah. Anyone have any question? I don't know. I think I rushed too much. I also wanted to say, yes, Nicolas.
Yeah. Thanks for the presentation. I can definitely relate, having touched a bit this kind of issue as well. I can put you in touch with a colleague of mine who works exclusively with social LCA, essentially, so she might be able to help you with that. I had a question as well, if you're interested. It was if you think about how the life cycle assessment results are going to be used by decision makers, do you think it's a good thing to try to integrate future scenarios in the LCA, or is it better or safer to stick to using present data?
I mean, I guess we should definitely include some future information in LCA, because present data really doesn't make sense, especially with the electricity mix, right? And it will radically change, hope to radically change. And the other studies often use SSPs, shared socioeconomic pathways, as scenarios. So they select like 3 to 5 scenarios and model them. I think that's also nice, but then you're kind of also locked into the SSP narratives. Maybe it's nicer to have more varied explorative scenarios there as well. I don't know.
I can say that in building LCA, the recommendation now, or that it is going to arise from a group from the International Energy Agency, is to stick to either present scenarios or near future, like 5 years future, because not because they represent what's actually going to happen, but because they are the only data source that is actually can be verified and is relatively, as much as possible, value free in a way. It's just statistical data you're getting from the system operator, for instance.
Interesting. And maybe at some also to some aspect, it's like the worst data or worst maybe input. So
yes,
things should get better in that sense.
Yeah, there's definitely a bit of precautionary principle in there as well.
Cool. Thanks for sharing. And I would like to say 1 minute and go to the next person, which is Christopher. Is he there? Look, I do see his name. Are you there? Yes. We don't hear you.
Oh, I'm right here. Hang on a second. Let me just share my screen. Oh, just a sec.
Yeah, we see your screen. Yes.
Yeah. Just a sec. Can you see the full slide? Not the.
We see a presenter mode.
You see presenter mode? Okay, I'll try to do this again.
Yeah, if you have a double screen, maybe that's why.
That's why. Try this. Okay. How's that? Is that better? Oh wait, sorry.
We don't see. Yeah.
There we go.
Oh yeah, full screen.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, sorry. This is going to be fast and furious. I'm going to talk, run briefly through some work that I've just finished and an extension of that work that I've just started. Just a second. So I'm interested in questions of where and how we might live justly under long-term global environmental change and what considerations of time might have to do with that. So some of the talks yesterday spoke to that quite a bit. This is coming from the idea that I'm not sure that we're matching our scale of conceptualization and scale of effort to the scale of the challenge, especially if we're talking about human beings being something of a geological force on the planet and the changes we're implementing right now being so significant. So I've just returned to Canada after a number of years in the UK, most recently as a postdoc at the University of Leeds, where I had a small side project where we explored the question of what happens to climate projections and their impacts if we extend them beyond 2100. The idea being that most of our benchmarks or temporal benchmarks or horizons, we're looking at 2030 or 2050 or 2100, and very few extend beyond that date, which is these are arbitrary horizons. The 2100 mark was used from the 1980s when they first started doing climate models, and that seemed pretty far away. But the climate keeps changing after that date. So we combined some climate models and vegetation models and a measure of heat stress to see the impact on human beings, and the growing conditions for 10 staple crops to get a sense of what happens if we model climate change under different RCPs out to 2500. And what we found was that if you can see that at the top of that figure, the squiggly lines extending 2500 show significant increases of temperature extending well beyond 2100, and then a bit of a bump near the end of this century, and then kind of stabilizing for RCP6. And the dotted lines are sea level rise due to thermal expansion. And then we also have questions about how hot the planet is going to get, and what that means for human beings in there. So we see with heat stress under all but RCP 2.6, we see significant problems with fail range temperatures in much of the world if under high end climate scenarios, which is pretty sobering. And then we looked at things like vegetation and precipitation in several regions of the world to get a sense of what that might actually look like on the ground. So you can see, for example, changes in the vegetation in the American Midwest towards more broadleaf trees. The Amazon rainforest under high-end scenarios becomes quite barren. Even under mitigation scenarios, we end up more in terms of forest and grassland than we do under our model projections anyway, than the rainforest we see today. And all of these are profound changes, even under the sort of low-end Paris Agreement type ambition. And then we looked at changes in agriculture for staple crops. What we're trying to do with this is sort of get a sense of where the optimal growing regions, very coarse, where optimal growing regions will be, so that we can get a sense of where people might best live under those conditions. We combine that with things like heat stress and sea level rise. We end up talking about a population redistribution of the planet. And then what we did was we have an artist, and our artist can. We created 3 sets of paintings, one based on past environments, so 500 years ago, in these 3 regions we took to take a close look at, and one about now and one in the future. And so the future is where the imaginaries come in. So is the past a bit as well. I think, which is a question that occurred to me as I was listening to the talks today and yesterday. So you can see the person in a climate controlled suit in India with robotic agriculture, so she can inhabit the heat environment that is and survive basically. And then we looked at Amazonia, for example. So 500 years ago was an indigenous settlement in the forest, and we had archaeologists on our team who could check that. The image now, then under RCP6, a very barren looking Amazon region with some signs of human habitation or infrastructure there too, for different reasons, serving different purposes. And then, the US Midwest. So, indigenous village, you can see the corn, beans, and squash, 3 sisters growing there, the kind of model culture we see today. And then sort of these hybrid plants living in a hotter, more humid Midwest in 500 years under RCP6. So I'm taking some of these ideas now and these sort of long-term past and future constructions, and applying them to a project called ResNet, or an initiative called ResNet in Canada, where we're looking at a number of different landscapes and the ecosystem services that they provide. And I'm kind of piggybacking this work onto this to provide some empirical basis to do this, and hopefully develop a series of tools through participatory work that could be used to explore converting these projections and constructions of different futures into usable tools to see what that does, especially at longer time scales. If we're looking near the near future, how does the near versus the long-term future change the conversation? How it respond to changes in the environment now. So we're also looking at other potential outputs in terms of different methodological and practitioner tools, images and narrative work, so story, short films and media, and games. And we have I'm thinking of a few ideas around those that we could do to develop these, to develop the ideas that we're thinking through here. And that brings me to the end of my talk, and you can see the past chasing the future there on the bottom. And I don't know if we want to do questions now or at the end, but I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? Yeah, I was curious, when you used the RCP, it was free of the socioeconomic conditions, like.
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's something that I want to bring in the future of the work. And there's been some criticisms of the SSPs, and they're fairly idealized, and they fit well with the kind of RCP SSP scenarios that they produce. But there's other imaginations of the future that we can bring into that, and they are pretty coarse. So part of what we're doing is maybe take those, but also open the door to more creative explorations of other scenarios, or take the SSPs and then really take a deep dive into what a fine-grained look would be at those, especially at sort of a regional or a national scale. So yeah, that's a big question for us.
Yeah, thank you. Vitalija?
Yes, thank you very much for this interesting work. How do you plan to explore your future outputs? Yeah, like you mentioned, these movies and different narratives. Are you planning to work with some collectives, or what are going to be your attempts?
So we're exploring it. We're developing that right now, and so some of this might be sort of arts-based and participatory methods, so that we could construct different versions of the landscape and the stakeholders involved in that under different scenarios. But I'm also looking at sort of more digital means. So for example, like an augmented reality approach that you could play with different landscape changes and socioeconomic changes at different timescales and see what that does. So this is very early stages in this work. So and we have some ideas to get funding for that as well. So I think there's a number of different options, and some of what people have mentioned in the past couple of days that I've made notes on as well. So it's yeah.
Thank you very much. We can talk about it more in the Slack thread if anyone's interested. I will be very much interested. And I also found it interesting that I stop thinking after 2100, right? But the future doesn't stop there.
No, it doesn't, and that's it. And if you can see that change developing beyond that, why do we halt our thinking at these
exactly
dates?
Yeah, it's not like 1.5 at 2100 and everything's good, right? So interesting. Yeah, but we will hand it over now to Simon. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Christopher.
Hello there, everybody.
You want to share your screen?
Yeah,
yes,
I'm working on that while introducing myself here. I'm Sam. I'm super excited and quite nervous to be presenting here. 1 second.
Yeah, it's a very interesting title. Yeah.
Thanks. So you should now be able to see my screen.
It's coming up, not yet. It's taking some time, I guess. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Let me know when you can see the screen.
I will. Yeah, it's still.
It's still loading.
Yeah, it says has. Oh, at least for me, it has started screen sharing.
Yeah, I'm getting the signal as well that that you're seeing the screen.
Does anybody else see the screen? Not me yet.
No.
No. Hold on, let me try again. But it also seems like something froze here on my end. Wow, wonderful. Yeah.
It happens.
Alrighty, then I'll well the the slides are totally necessary for what I'm now my system.
Oh, did he? Yes. Are you there? Gone. Maybe his whole system crashed. Oh, you're back.
Okay, I'm back.
You're back. Yes.
Or sorry, I'll try again. There was something. Yeah. Okay, can you?
Oh yeah, now we see it full screen. Perfect.
Wonderful. Okay, that was the best start for me, because I was already super nervous. So all the bad things happening out of the way. I'm Sam. I work for the Center for Advanced Internet Studies in Germany, which is a research institute looking at the socio-technological effects of the digital transformation on society. But I have a background as a photographer, movie producer. I studied media management and was in the world of design thinking, service design, and recently got some additional training in systems thinking methodologies from a great initiative called Design Dissolve. And right now I will try to mix all those three fields: storytelling, the innovation, and systems thinking, with what I've recently learned in systems thinking. And I'm doing that, exploring the common cultural narrative of the hero's journey. So what you know from Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, but as I would argue, still best in Parsable. And so in the next 3 minutes, I'll run you through my ideas for a paper that I've started. And I would love some feedback: what resonates, what else does it touch, what's missing, etc. And please excuse me running through this very obvious written script. It's just those kind of events create a weird sense of detachment for me, where some cognitive compensation is happening in my head that makes it hard for me to maintain the focus on my own train of thought. So I'm starting with the hero's journey. I'll play with it. I'm molding, comparing, and adapting it to other frameworks I know from systems thinking to foster systemic awareness and unearth the systemic dimension of the hero's journey and of the stories we tell ourselves. This is for the context of storytelling. I base this on a visual that I got from Angela Oguntala, who does some very impressive future foresight work, and I highly recommend checking her out. She uses this visual to underscore the different levels of meaning within the stories we tell ourselves, and frames it in the way, or uses it when talking about mythical systems thinking, or she sometimes says calls it sacred interconnectedness, which I like very much. And that visual is quite similar to another framework, which is the iceberg model, just as the introduction that, of course, the underneath visible events, there's patterns, underlying structures, mental models. And I'll use that to gain this systemic perspective and not get lost in singular events like the ego. And by the way, usually the iceberg framework is modeled like this on the left with that pillar thingy, and that is physically completely flawed because of the buoyancy in water, the iceberg would flip. So that's why I'm using the surround spherish iceberg, but also because I'm playing with that model. And so my first step was I flip the perspective and take a look from above, and then I keep playing with it, dissolving the strict boundaries between, for example, here events, pattern, trends, and trying to think of it as maybe it's not like a static thing, but it's like a moving spiral, or looking at how can those things overlap, how could those moving spirals as a visual of the iceberg how could they maybe overlap in a timeline or in a moment of parallelity or synchronicity. And why I'm doing that is because the hero's journey, as you know, it includes several distinct moments where with specific characters. And I want to suggest that reading the hero's journey alternatively as those overlapping stories instead of an individual story can be super productive. And then again, why? Because if we want to imagine a future as a collectively shared experience of growth or transformation, etc., this is only then this could be an alternative form of narrative to use when we're telling each other stories of our possible futures. And this can help shifting the focus in our everyday storytelling toward a systemic awareness, or an awareness that aims at long-term sustainable collective journeying, instead of getting lost in short-term capitalistic or ego-centered stories. And with that, that is why I called it From Ego to Echo, because those stories connect ego to echo and enable a new and well-needed new perspectives. And in my paper that I'm writing, I'm also looking at how can this new way of storytelling, or this it's not new, but this way of storytelling, how can that help us ask what kind of stories are we telling ourselves? Why is it always the he? Or also, how do we talk about change and how do we talk about innovation? But all those things here with the so what and now what, that can maybe be impulses for a super short discussion, which I would love to start by giving you all 30 seconds to type something in the chat that you took away from my speedy run through, but don't hit send yet. Just something, what resonated, what is interesting, what am I missing, what else could be in there, or what does it remind you of? Just write it into the chat. You have another 20 seconds, then I'll hit say go, you hit enter, because then we'll have a basis to discuss about. And while you do that, here is already my thank you last slide. Find me on wherever you want to find me. And yeah, that's it. Let's see what you took away from this in the chat. Oh, wonderful. I like that. Absolutely, Jonathan, what you're saying with the hero's journey as without beginning or ending, that's another dimension to it. The circularity as not, or if you take it as another, compare it to another framework from organizational development, the idea of double loop learning, a term you might know from Scrum or Agile or design thinking. That yes, it's a loop, yes, it's a circular movement, but there's always change happening as well. Maybe that's another way of looking at it. Any other questions? I ran through this super quickly, I know, but thanks for the chance to present it first.
Yeah, it's great. There are more comments, but I think we are running out of time. But it will be we will also, our Slack community can have more webinars outside of the conferences in upcoming months. So yeah, that will be really cool to have a longer version of your talk as well. Thank you. And next is Rachel, or Rachel Wilson. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry. Just work out how to share my screen. I'm used to using Microsoft Teams, so I haven't actually done this before.
Oh, yeah.
Zoom. Okay, sorry, I've just got to allow it to.
Yeah, you can do the share screen mode. And Sam, you can also reply to the comments directly on this chat. Yeah, there are some comments, follow-up comments.
Can you see my
It's
screen?
coming up. Yeah, we see it. Yep.
Perfect. So I'm a first year master's student, so I do kind of feel a little bit behind everyone else in terms of my academic journey at the moment. I also feel like my work's maybe a little left field. I'm definitely not like necessarily dealing with sort of like hard science sort of data at the moment, but I'd still love to hear people's feedback on this from that perspective. A little bit of a background. I actually started off with music, so that's my main background. I'm now studying sustainable design, which sounds like a complete reroute. For me, I don't think that way at all, which is kind of the basis of this project. It is a very small project. I didn't have time to put slides together, so I'm just showing the workbook. So please don't feel like you need to actually read all of the text and everything, but it's for more to prompt me. Basically, the essential core of this project is thinking about taking sort of speculative design, but thinking about it from a sonic perspective, and so in speculative listening. So I love this quote from R. Shaver here that says, I believe the way to improve the world soundscape is quite simple. We must learn how to listen. I just think that's just a really nice kind of contextual introduction to the project. But I think for me, really, it's because I feel like we live in such an ocular-centric world. So essentially, I kind of feel like a lot of my work is really just the advocation for multi-sensory ways of communication and understanding. And for me, with my background being in music, my exploration, tentatively at the moment is through listening. So this was just a little mind map of some thoughts I had about ways to explore listening within the context of sustainable design. Obviously, this list is not exhaustive, whatsoever. But just these were some sort of listening interactions, a kind of thought for a model that we had to prepare. And through that, I sort of arrived at this, say, very speculative idea of a speculative listening booth. So with different questions and considerations about lost, present and future sounds, because again, I think there's such a visual focus, and really I kind of wanted to just really think about it from a sonic, perspective. And the idea is really just to have some prompts that people could answer. So different questions, again, regarding lost sounds, current sounds and future sounds, but also with an interactive element to it. So you would be able to hear, so like, redundant technologies, or, presence, or like buildings that have been lost. I think that's, quite an interesting exploration, but also speculation around what people think the future might sound like. As I say, this is very, very tentative, but again, another quote that I really loved, that I think just provides a bit of context for this kind of work, is from Salome Vogelin. It says that listening offers an alternative perspective on how things are, producing new ideas on how they could be and how we could live in a sonic possible world, and how we could include sound invisible formlessness in a current realization and valuation of what we understand to be the actual world. And I really love that comment on sounds invisible formlessness, the kind of almost that kind of ephemeral exploration, as say, of the sonic, rather than just that focus on the visual side of things. So I'm conscious of time, so I'm really just trying to skip through all of that. But yeah, just considering, speculative listening, the role of silence as well. This was a very, very short section of the workbook. As I say, it was meant to be like a 2,000 word workbook, but obviously, as we all know, that words get out of hand. But I think the different ways of listening, I think, was just something really important. For one thing I really wanted to explore within this project was really listening as a participatory action. But obviously, that then raises the question of, who's listening and in what context and for whom. And the different ways of listening, I think stumbling across kind of like ideas about embodied listening, and that essentially sound is just vibration, right? So what are the different ways that we can experience sound? And then just jumping across to cultural listening, different cultural listening practices that, it's not so much focused on that kind of like how we understand it in the global north. That was doing just one paragraph on that was quite frustrating. It's something I really want to explore more, but also technological listening, how all these smart devices are essentially kind of listening to us in our homes. So you have the ecological exploration of listening, but also this kind of futurist perspective there, I guess. And yeah, so just different kind of areas listening there. But as I kind of just put in my very short summary here, this is meant to be just a very tentative exploration, of listening as a methodology. It's more, one thing I really don't want is to kind of suggest that listening is an answer or a solution. I think I'll stop sharing my screen now. I don't want to present listening as something that is a solution. It's really just a methodology or something to be considered, and certainly I want it to, or I'd love to explore it within regards to policy making spaces. How can it be utilized as such an immersive kind of sense, and how can it be utilized within not just communication, but as making a difference within policy spaces. So that was completely off the cuff. I'm really sorry, kind of winging it a little bit there, but I hope some of that made sense, and it was, I'd love to hear feedback anyway.
Thank you. Yeah. So this listening includes humans, non-humans, everything.
Yeah, so I skipped over that bit. Thank you for prompting it. But that was a really huge component, actually, the soundscape studies bit, within sort of bioacoustics, and you have zoo musicology as well, which are really important aspects. Yes, not to have such an anthropocentric listening consideration, but in terms of when you think about noise pollution, we often talk about it as noise pollution in our homes, but actually are we considering the impacts, like you say, on non-human counterparts, and how that might interfere with danger sort of calls, mating calls, all that kind of thing.
Vitalija has a question. Yes,
thank you, Rachel. Really very exciting research. Do you have some ideas how would you process your listening data, and how would you communicate it further? This data collection and processing and dissemination, delivery towards maybe society or policymakers, in which format it could take, in which shapes? Thank you.
No, not at the moment. This was just a mock-up of something that I did very quickly, I will admit. It hasn't actually taken place. But that idea of how to bring that into a kind of policy making space, and like you say, how to use that data, that's something I want to explore going forward, because it feels very important to me for this not to just be theoretical. Like, I want to be able to understand how to use sonic practices and listening practices to make it tangible. So I mean, if you have any thoughts on that, I would love to know, but certainly it's something I want to explore going forward into my second year.
Thank you. And someone's asking for the authors of the quotes, so you can maybe answer that. And now we have the last but not least, Brussels Health Garden Project People team. Where are you? Hello.
Hello.
Yeah.
So, yes. Vitalija and I, Sugir.
Sugir, I think the audio
Vitalija, would you like to share the screen?
Oh, yeah, okay.
Do you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you. It was a bit choppy before, but now it's good. Yeah.
Ah, sorry. Vitalija, would you like to share your screen?
Yes.
So while she will introduce myself. So I'm an evolutionary biologist, and lately I was living in Europe. As Christopher, I just came back to Canada, my country now for the moment. So this project is called Brussels Health Garden, and the title that we came up with was co-exploration of our culture, social and natural resources to build urban resilience. What was special by hearing all those projects in the past hours? I think some of them you will probably connect to this project as well. So just to put you in the context, Belgium is becoming densely populated and is probably going to become actually one big city. For instance, 92% of the population in 1960 lived in urban and peri-urban area, and 80% in 2016. Also, one of the other feature of this city is that 50% of the city is non-built space, which means that it has a lot of green space. For instance, forest, more than 100 parks, squares, and garden, private and collectives. Also, what we also interesting about the city is one of the most ethnically diverse city in the world, with more than 185 nationality and with 1.2 million people. What we came up with is our hypothesis is that we with such diversity in terms of culture, this has potentially it's actually a hotspot of knowledge. It could this means knowledge in terms of not only a native knowledge but also in terms of foreign knowledge as well. So yes, so I will leave Vitalija for the next slide.
Thank you very much, Sugir. So basically, this research that we are doing came from academia. So it was initiated by University Museum of Medicinal Plants. And the intention was to engage into co-creation research. So we started to build all together community project in response to co-create research action call made by Brussels Research and Innovation Agency. And this call is orienting to urban resilience. So as you saw, Brussels is very contrast cities, and it can go from very gray environments to very green environments. And basically, for this co-create research, we are exploring how city could withstand better current or imagined crisis, and how we could imagine innovative solutions for that to address these situations if we experience. So basically, academics are being called to collaborate with NGOs, local and administrative authorities, or citizens and practitioners, and to imagine these different innovative solutions and to test them in living labs. So in our project, we created in 2019 a transdisciplinary team, and we started to reflect collectively how we could use green environments for self-care and nature medicine. And the main questions we posed, so how we could strengthen the urban resilience and to introduce traditional or folk or common knowledge on health and nature in Brussels, outside the capitalistic system, that it would be really like a commoning mean. And we also asked if it's possible to move away from very high dependence on conventional Western medicine practices, and where knowledge is very based on expertise of doctors, and if we could embrace the different types of knowledge that are being available in Brussels city, in this diversity. So as approaches, we used co-creation, design thinking, and U-theory approach. And we tried, to explore where these nature-based health practices are being grounded. So we've been going to many allotment gardens. We explored forest bathing techniques. There are also new spaces being created in institutions like psychiatric hospitals or in public spaces. There are a lot of upcoming meditative paths and small pockets, nature pockets where people can restore and reinforce their health. And some of desired outcomes that we have is about developing autonomy and urban resilience. Also, we would like to map all available resources for self-care that are being around or being constructed. We also imagined of constructing survival kit. So in times of crisis, what resources we could create and what would be our preparedness. We're also very interested in emerging new knowledge, how in this transformation we live, new knowledge is being constructed and transferred intergenerationally as well. We have interest on promoting urban biodiversity, social links and knowledge sharing. And we look closely how sustainable alternative approaches could support existing systems or to transform them. So here I end. So our project, ongoing, and it's very slow. And most of the work we did kind of empirically. And at the moment we are doing theoretical grounding. So we look also for theories which could support our work, and we are looking also for new methods of exploration, especially this imaginaries, because our project's been evaluated by this research agency and it was considered not radical enough. So we would really like to work more methodologically, and to exchange with you what is possible. So Sugir, I am also passing to you if you would like to add something.
You're muted.
Yeah, you are muted.
In terms of transformation, what we are searching for, or what we are intending to do, it's also to decolonize actually knowledge. So specifically toward health and nature in an urban context. And I think before we were talking about bringing knowledge or a common image in the future. So this is also about to bring actually how to bring a common image for a possible future. We know that in a urban context we will get multiple and diverse images or chances. So we will like to create perhaps a common. Yes, how could we create one if there is a one?
Yes. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we don't have time for comment and feedback, but people feel free to go over to Slack for further questions, because it's really interesting. I found that, urban gardening is not just about food. There's also medicine and healing. And I'm really looking forward to your map and the survival kit. Yes. And now to Sarah in the game.
Oh, I'm really sorry that there's not more time, Vitalija and Sugir, to discuss your project. I hope that in the community you will get some more space to discuss your project. I will also, anyways, to all the participants send out an invitation to join our entire Slack community. So then if you want that, accept that. You can also check out all the other channels and interact with many more people than just the people that took part in this conference.